Okay, so one of my hedges, and it's an extremely important hedge, especially because of my personality. I have an outgoing personality. I do and say things that I don't think through lots of the times. Joe would say all of the time. And so this hedge is I don't meet alone with people of the opposite sex. Now, actually, it's just made it easier. I don't meet alone with anybody, especially at work and even for work. So what I did is, and I was able to do this, was pretty easy because I worked for a board of trustees, but in the office and in the district, the school district, as long as it doesn't violate the law or policy or protocols, I can kind of make the rules. So my rule was that whenever I met with somebody, I just met with other people. I had two people, Kevin and Jim, that I trusted. And I would just have them in those meetings with me. Now there was some people that said, no, this is a confidential meeting, and they kind of didn't like that. And I would tell them, no, you can trust these people. I would trust them with my life. Well, maybe not my life, but I really would trust them. So that didn't become a problem after a while. And in fact, given my personality, I don't finish sentences, I jump from topic to topic. It actually made me a better communicator because I told those fellows, I said, I'll tell you what, if I am not communicating what I need to communicate, you jump in and do that. And so the thing that the objective that I had was more often reached because I had those other people. Now, I will tell you that when I have a hedge, or when any of you have hedges, I don't think that it's carved on stone tablets. It can change depending on if you see there needs to be a change. And let me give you an example. So during our recovery, and we had gotten pretty far actually, we went out with two other couples and we were going to go to dinner. When we got there, our table was not ready. So they had us go and wait in the lounge area. So as so often happens, there was the three guys, and so we were talking, and the women were talking. We were probably 10 feet apart. These are two other ex-superintendents, and so it was, I think, a kind of wintry, windy night, and who blows in the door but a group of about 10 young female teachers that we kind of knew who they were. Well, I'm friendly, and so what do? We started talking, and we were having a lot of fun. But Joe was 10 feet away. She was, and said alone. My hedge is alone. Well, we're continuing to talk, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. And all of a sudden, though, I look for the other two guys that are with me, and as far as I know, they didn't experience affairs in their marriage, but they're back with our wives. And I'm thinking, whoa, this might not be good. And about that time, Joe, I see, is going towards the restroom. And she gives me the stink eye. And if looks could kill, I would be dead. I'm thinking, oh boy. So I disengage from this group, and I walk over to her as she's on her way back to the group, and I'm going to follow her to the group. And, this was really a smart thing to do. It was a great question. I said, is something wrong? And she says, we will talk later. We will talk later. So during this recovery, we learned, or Joe learned, never to let the sun go down on her anger. So we had a talk when we got home before we went to bed. Now, there was a time that I would have said, Joe, for crying out loud, you were 10 feet away. What am I going to do when you are watching? But I didn't do that. And so I adjusted that it didn't mean just when I was alone. It meant when there were other women there, even if Joe was in that setting. And she did ask me why I did that. And I said, stupid answer, I said because I didn't want to offend them. I wanted to be polite. So in trying to be polite with these ladies that I hardly knew, I offended my wife. And so what we did, I said, you're absolutely right. We need to, I need to change that hedge, and let's talk about what I'm going to do in the future. and we did. It didn't end in a terrible argument. But so these hedges you have to adjust. I think you have to adjust based on what your needs are and what your strengths and weaknesses are. That's a big weakness for me. I don't think before I do things.
Because I was the spouse that did not betray, I did not think I needed any kind of boundaries or hedges, and I found out that I did. But it wasn't on my own that I figured this one out. Mike and I had a Bible study in our home one summer, and the seating was not how we do Hope and Healing seating anymore. As you can tell just from around this room, it's male, female, female, male. We don't cross.
We're a little paranoid.
Yes, a little paranoid. But in this situation, I was sitting on, I used to say love seat, but I'm just going to say small couch, with this one man, and his wife was sitting right next to him, but she was in a chair. And Mike was the facilitator, so I was not sitting next to Mike. And as it turned out, we go around the room and give our prayer request, or how'd the week go, and we each give a response. So this young man who was sitting next to me, he started speaking, and he was sharing how hard this week had been for him. And I have all kinds of excuses for this, but thinking of him as my son, and he's sharing, I put my hand on his knee and said, "It's okay, it's okay." And he continued on.
He was older than your son.
Yes, he was. But he wasn't as old as you.
That makes me feel really good. Yeah, that's great. It's great. Yeah.
Okay, that was too long. So then we continued. We had questions and answers and all that. Then it was time to end, and we all walked into our entryway, and Mike was going to close in prayer, and we all held hands. And as it turned out, he was standing next to me, because you walk out that way, and he was standing next to me. So we joined hands, and I was holding his hand. And we said, everybody prayed, or Mike just prayed, I don't remember. And as we ended, I touched his knee again, because I'm short and he was a little tall. And and we said goodnight. Mike walked everybody out the door, and he came back in, closed the door, and said, "What are you doing?" And seriously, it just kind of blew me out of the water. I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, "You were all over that guy." I said, "No, I wasn't all over him." But what that taught me was, what I was playing out was that I was being very sympathetic, and I was a listening ear, and I wanted him to feel okay. Now, the part that we didn't know was going to play out later is that couple got a divorce not too many years after that. Not that he was coming back to reconnect our friendship. It wasn't that at all. It's just that I didn't know where his brain was at the time and what he was thinking at the time. And I could have been giving the wrong message, which was not appropriate. So what I learned was that I also need to have a hedge, and there are rules about touching the opposite sex. And those rules apply to me as well. So people out there who are the spouses and didn't feel they ever did anything wrong to make this marriage end up where it was, you still have some responsibilities.
Okay, well, one of my hedges, and this sounds rather silly, but I have a healthy view of a good marriage. And I didn't realize I didn't have a healthy view of a good marriage until it seemed like every time I turned around, I was disappointed in Gary. He hadn't done this, or he hadn't done that, or I thought maybe he would or could. And I didn't realize that I was looking for Gary to be everything I ever dreamed of in a husband, and everything I ever hoped for, and he would grow into that. And so I had put these, they weren't even conscious expectations, but they were there nonetheless, and he kept falling short. And once we got into recovery and talked about all kinds of issues, and we had a good counselor, I realized that I needed a healthy view of marriage and a healthy view of Gary as a man, a human being, and my husband. So I no longer look to him to be all of those things or hope he'll be next year.
Well, one of my hedges is no secrets. I know that sounds kind of crazy because that's exactly what got me into the situation that I got into in the first place. But it's really important to me to keep everything in the light. And if you haven't heard that yet, hear it again. Get it in the light. Enemy loses his power. Because it's in that flirtation and in that temptation that it's those secrets that start. And if you get it into the light, then that robs the enemy of that power. So how it's turned into a hedge in my life is I work with a lot of females in my business, and my particular company is kind of on the phone, and I deal with my clients that way. Not that I'm not good looking and all. Yeah, right. Okay. Well. Anyway.
We're not laughing at you.
I know. I know. But it's on the phone. I can be kind of hot. I'm just kidding.
Especially with that gray shirt, buddy.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so what'll happen is sometimes that in the communication with a client or whatever, I might get an email or something that might even just have a hint of flirtation or just too friendly. It's beyond business. One of the things that I've decided is I wanted to forward those to Mona, and I would just send those off to her. And the only reason in the beginning was I don't want her to ever have a doubt about that. I'd hate for her to ever have her open an email and go, well, what's this all about? And that would only fuel the fact that, that there was something I was being dishonest about. But so I started to just forward her these emails, and it's not like they came in all the time, but every now and then. And then after a while, Mona said, well, I really appreciate that, because we talked about it when I first sent them to her. And she said that she really appreciated that. But then after a while, she said, you don't need to do this. I trust you, and I understand what you're trying to do, and that's very cool. But you don't need to do this. And so I stopped doing it, thinking that, well, maybe I'm being a little too overboard or whatever. But what I did, but after about a couple, 3 or 4 days, I thought, you know what? This hedge isn't for her convenience. Not that I'm trying to be inconvenient for her. But I communicated with her. I said, this is my hedge. So if you could please kind of take these emails and throw them away like you would any other spam. I mean, I don't care what you do with them, but I just want to be able to have this, to just have that for you. So that is something that, I don't know, sounds like it may be a little over the top, but it's something that I don't like to give the enemy any kind of, any ground to build on. It also really helps to keep things open and honest with Mona and myself about anything that might be like a temptation or something that might come along that way, because then you have this sense of freedom that I need to talk to you about this because of this, and it's just a real safe place to be. And so anyway, I think that the sin, the temptation is not necessarily the sin. It isn't. It's what you do with it. But if you can keep these things in the light, then the enemy loses his power. So with me, my hedge with Mona is no secrets.
Okay, my second hedge, and it's almost embarrassing that this would have to be a hedge. It seems like it should be part of everybody's makeup, but the hedge is tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. And I have the purpose to do that. I came from a family of liars. I didn't think it was bad. It wasn't lying in kind of a terrible sense. It was that you lied because you didn't want to hurt people's feelings. Little white lies. Mm-hmm. It made it so that you didn't have an argument. It didn't hurt people's feelings when you told them the truth. You just told little white lies. So I came into our marriage lying, and a lot of my lies were lies of omission. Mm-hmm. So if I went to lunch with somebody at work and I came home and Joe said, what did you do for lunch? I said, well, we went to lunch so-and-so. And she said, okay, who went with you? And I would give the names of 2 guys that worked in the office. End of conversation. That wasn't a lie. Mm-hmm. That wasn't a lie, because those 2 guys were there. There were also 2 females. Mm-hmm. And I would keep that a secret. So that became kind of a way of life with me. I didn't think it was bad. Mm-hmm. I thought it was just kind of keeping things on an even keel. And so I have to purpose to make sure that I tell Joe the truth, even though that may cause her some angst. Now, one of my heroes is a couple. I'm not going to tell you their names because I don't have permission. And he had an affair, a long-term affair. And after a year of recovery, and we met them through Hope and Healing, after a year of recovery, on his birthday, guess what comes to his place of work? A dozen long-stem roses from the affair partner. So he had a choice now. Now, he was going to throw them in the wastebasket, but then he didn't want the people that worked in the office to think that, because they thought they were from his wife. And so he took them, and he stopped at a bridge on the way home, and he threw those in the river. Now, I'll be honest with you, I need to confess, I might have just torn up the card, stopped at a florist on the way home, and written a card out to Joe and said, boy, I really love you, Joe. But he did not do that. What he did is he went home and he told his wife that he had gotten a dozen roses from the affair partner. You can imagine how that weekend turned out. It was World War III.
Yeah.
But you know what happened? That was a watershed moment in their relationship, and the four of us watched that happen. She went from not trusting a thing he said to trusting him now that he was going to tell her the truth, because he was willing to do that even though it would cause a big argument, which it did. I think it was maybe one of the most important things on their road to recovery. Now, I'll tell you this also, is that Satan plays games with this. He's going to tell you it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
You're never going to make them happy. You're never going to gather their trust. I got to the place where my life was an open book. It really was. Joe had access to my phone. We were getting ready to go on a vacation one day. I was in the shower. I hear my phone ring. Shoot, Joe, would you get that phone? Because I wasn't afraid of anything on that phone. And so when I get out from the shower, she's standing there, and things look like they're wrong, you know? And I said, what happened? Who was on the phone? She says, well, I don't know. I said, well, what happened? So she shares the conversation. Joe answers the phone, says, who is this? There's a female on the other end. She says, well, who's this? And Joe says, who's this? The female on the other line says, who's this? This goes back and forth, and finally the other person hangs up. And I said, well, Joe, that must have been just a wrong number. She says, well, I thought that, but then I went to your phone history, and you called that number, that same number, 3 times last week. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, wait a minute. I know I'm okay. I tell the truth. There's nothing on there. And so she's not satisfied with that answer, and I can understand why. And so I had to go get some money from the ATM, and I said, you keep the phone. I'm going to go get the money. If they call, you find out who that is. And she says, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not your mother. You take the phone. Okay. All right, so I get in the car, and I'm going to call that number. And then I'm thinking, oh, no. If I call the number, that will be in my recents, and she will see that, and I don't know what to do. So we get back, and things are still not good. And all of a sudden, the phone rings again. It's that same number. And I answer it. And I said, who's this? And she says, it's a lady that works in our office. And come to find out, what had happened is her husband was having an affair. She saw a number that she did not recognize. She calls my phone, and who answers but a female. Satan would tell you it doesn't work. It does work. And telling the truth is the best policy.
Amen.
I think a president said that, maybe our first.
That's right. And the reason why that gentleman's number was in your phone is because you had done some work
that's
with
right.
him.
Thank you, Gary. He was a plumber, and I wasn't just calling him. He wasn't asking advice on how to have an affair. He was fixing something at our home, and I called him 2 or 3 times.
Good.
But I did tell the truth. Yeah.
Okay, my second hedge that I'm going to talk about, I learned the hard way, and I'm just going to tell you what it is. No close friendships with the opposite sex. So for a long period of time, my best friend and Mike worked at the same school district. In fact, they had lunch every day. And Mike took his lunch, I made his lunch. And I encouraged this to go on. And they had lunch every day. So they spent an hour. And most of the time I'm thinking they're talking about family stuff. And we were in a ministry together. And so I figured they were talking about ministry and they were talking about school and just all the things that friends talk about. Well, the reality is this ended up being Mike's emotional affair. And I think the very hardest part for me, and I might have shared this earlier, is that what happened in the emotional affair is I felt Mike gave his heart to her. Now, I know he didn't do that intentionally, but because they started having so much stuff in common, that they could really relate, and they started talking on a deeper level about understanding each other's feelings, and there was time spent. A book that has been brought up in Hope and Healing, it's called Not Just Friends by Dr. Shirley Glass. She talks about the 3 components to an emotional affair, and they are secrecy. Now, and you've heard Mike talk that he wasn't keeping secrets. He just wasn't telling the whole truth. So I knew they had lunch every day, but I didn't know the depth of their conversations. I just knew, they talked about church or they talked about school, but I didn't realize they were talking about feelings that I had never heard Mike express. So it was a whole different level. The second one was an emotional intimacy, and this I learned much later, was that in giving your heart away, there is a connection that doesn't always happen in a sexual affair. I mean, that doesn't mean they don't happen, but they get to a level of, and we tell this to our teenage girls, or I guess boys too, that you start dating before you get into the back seat of the car and have sex. And so many times in our society these days, we lose that front part about just talking to each other and trying to learn about each other. And that's what Mike and my friend did so well. The last one was sexual chemistry. Now, they did not have sex per se, but I would say that they had the attraction. All that to say, so no close friendships with the opposite sex, because that is going to lead you into dangerous waters. And understanding that, going through that, I have learned that I have to be careful of my friends as well, as all of us do when it comes to opposite sex relationships. So what we've come to in Hope and Healing is that is not healthy, because the minute you start sharing deep feelings, you are sharing who you are, the person you've become, or the person you want to become. So the hedge would be is only have friends of the marriage. Now, on the outside, this did look like friends of the marriage because she was my best friend. We were a foursome. But when they took it out of the foursome and just spent time with the 2 of them, it became inappropriate. And that's how I learned about it. So, friends of the marriage, and I would even say couples of the marriage, because you start singling friends out and we start dividing, and that's not a good place.
Okay, so another hedge that I have is that I am mindful of not reacting with my words and or my body language. I'm one of those people that you can pretty much tell what I'm thinking or feeling because it shows. You know, I would love to be able to have a little flare of emotion and not everybody knows, and then you just kind of quietly put it away and you go on with your day. But
ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, it's just, you know, I really do. So I have to be mindful of that, because I might have a flash of irritation, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm really angry. It's just part of my processing. and I have to be careful about that. Gary and I remember sitting on the couch and we were trying to communicate better, as every couple in adultery recovery does. And I would say something, and he would say that really sounded condescending to him. And I thought, I just said these 5 words. How can that feel condescending? But the point...
that's exactly how she said it.
So...
I just said... Okay, sorry.
So I have to be mindful of that. I really do.
Yeah.
That my words and my body language can communicate a message I don't necessarily want to send. So I try to think before I respond. I actually do. I don't count in my head, but I pause to consider if the words I want to say really need to come out of my mouth. And I can choose a little grace and empathy over fear and judgment. Now, I will not sacrifice truth because that's essential. But my hedge is to learn to speak truth with as much kindness and respect as possible.
Well, my next hedge is courageous conversations. Now, that's just part of our vocab, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mona, didn't we get this from a couple that was in the ministry as well? Yeah. Anyway, but this was just so apropos for us. Courageous conversations. Understanding me is I am the absolute conflict avoider of conflict avoiders. Peace at any price. That was my standard MO. And what that caused me to do was anytime something would come along in our relationship that might cause some conflict or whatever, I would just immediately shove it down because I wanted to keep the peace no matter what. And then that all eventually comes back. And not that this was like a purposed thing, but now in hindsight that I look back, there might have been some resentment in there from these things. And if you check out our the videos of our testimonies, you'll get a little bit more details about that. But just knowing that I was a conflict avoider, courageous conversations became a huge thing because I found there's a lot of stress in that. I didn't really want to bring up stuff that could cause troubles or stress in our relationship. So I learned that I had to be able to be courageous and sit down and say, there's something I think we need to talk about. And not only did I have to kind of man up and talk, Mona had to learn to kind of listen and listen to what I had to say. And it's in that mutual respect that we both have, and it is in that mutual respect for one another and really trying to get behind each other's eyes. And I think we'll be getting into that a lot more too. But it's like that's a really important thing. I really needed to be able to see it from her point. She needed to see it from my point. And so courageous conversations, that's really important. That's a hedge for us. And whenever any kind of conflict comes along, we are very quick, both of us. If we sense anything that could be like bothering us, the first thing we'll do is do a checkup of some sort. Hey, how you doing? I'm just kind of sensing something here. And we'll sit down and we'll have a conversation about it. Get it in the light. Yep. Courageous conversations. That's mine.
Okay, so my third hedge is I don't just blow off my spouse's comments, complaints, irritations, beliefs, because I don't think they're valid or that he or she does not really mean it. In this case, it's a she. So it's too easy to think your spouse is thinking like you are and feeling like you. So I'd like to tell you that I'm one of the world's greatest communicators. I may be one of the world's greatest talkers. I'm less of a listener and even less of a communicator. There was a famous movie, and the line that I remember most was, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And we did not communicate. We really, really didn't. And I would say that almost 100% of the couples that we have met and worked with, they were there because part of their problem was a lack of communication.
Yeah. Amen.
And then I also will tell them, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, that unless they get to be better at communication, they're probably not going to make it. They're not going to recover from adultery. It's that important. One of the things that I used to say to Joe was, "You really don't believe that." What an arrogant statement to make, that I can get inside her head and tell her what she actually believes. And we are so different in the way we think and talk. When you talk about opposites attracting, God did a number here. He must have a good sense of humor because we are so opposite in our personalities. I am an ADD, an expressive person. There's not a linear thought in my brain. how can we be out of money? We have checks left or credit cards left. On our wedding night, I had one real important task other than saying I do and so on and so forth, and that was to make the hotel reservation for our wedding night. I didn't make it. I didn't. And I kind of should have, because it was almost a disaster. Joe wanted to get an annulment at that point in time. Joe, on the other hand, is organized, linear thoughts. Everything has its place. I don't know where place is. Joe did have me on a list for lobotomy for a while, but we decided that wasn't, do any good. So it's really important that you get behind your spouse's eyes and try to understand where she's coming from. In fact, we have an activity that we do in the weekend intensives, and it really is trying to get the spouses to get behind each other's eyes, to understand and to empathize. And it's extremely important to do that. If you don't, you're not going to get to the place that Mona is famous for saying, a healthy marriage. You have to be able to do that. So that's my hedge. It's hard. And I will tell you, we have not changed our personalities, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but we still drive each other nuts on probably a daily basis. You can imagine. I'm a fun guy. I really am. I'm not a very organized guy.
Okay, this hedge is the most peculiar one, except we probably all feel that we have peculiar hedges because they are peculiar to us. So I have learned that I need to intentionally plan to be spontaneous and flexible.
Does that tell you something about her personality?
And Mike just explained or described my personality compared to his personality. He is totally spontaneous, flexible. He's a fun guy. And I am everybody in their place on time and clean hands and clean shirt. So what this has proven to us, it has proven to me that hedges not only keep dangers away from your marriage, you need to make the hedge around you and you need to stay in the hedge. Does that make sense to you guys? Anyway, so Mike and I, during our time of recovery, decided we'd kind of gotten away from having fun together. So we decided we would start having fun together. And after raising kids, and we did all that together, it came when the kids were all gone, we decided we needed to find some new things. Now, Mike had become, by this time, a backpacker, and he'd go out with the guys, and I would do my own thing with the girls. We'd probably do tea parties or something like that. I'm not the backpacker type. So in trying to start making happy memories, we went on a backpacking trip. And Mike knows who I am well enough that he wanted to make it fun for me. So he bought me all the equipment, very light, manageable, easy equipment, and knew that dinner is probably the most important part of the day because we can sit, relax, have a glass of wine. So he brought candles and brought wine, and we went to Big Five and we got our food, and we decided on beef stroganoff. I did not realize at the time that you can get beef stroganoff in a bag, and all you have to do is peel off the top, pour in some water, and voila, we had beef stroganoff by candlelight with wine. So when dinner was over, it started getting dark, and this is going to sound stupid, but I decided to say, what do we do now? And he said, well, it's time to go to bed. There's nothing else to do. And so Mike brings out the flashlight tent. I don't know if you guys know what a flashlight tent is, but it's the first time I'd been exposed to one, and it's about as big as a flashlight. It does open up a little bit bigger than that, but it goes straight from your toes, close to your body, and right over your head. So we crawled in, and
You only
Mike
weighed 4 pounds, though.
Yes, 4 pounds. And Mike was carrying the tent. So we got into bed. We got in our sleeping bags, and Mike very thoughtfully bought me a flashlight that I attached to my head so I could read, because he knows I need to read before I go to bed. So he puts his pillow or his head on his tiny little pillow and falls immediately to sleep, and I start reading. And did that for a while, and then I started hearing a noise outside, and I, started poking Mike and said, wake up, I'm hearing something. And, he reaches under his tiny little pillow and pulls out a knife and goes outside, which at this point I'm getting a little horrified that he feels he needs a weapon. And he went out, and at that point, I think it was a bear who had come into our cabin and was sniffing around for food, and Mike made a whole bunch of noise, and the bear ran away.
Came into your camp.
Yes.
Not your cabin.
Not the cabin.
Oh, yes. No, it was the
This was not a
flashlight.
cabin. She wanted it to be a cabin, but it was not a cabin.
It was the flashlight tent. So the bear came, Mike chased him away, and Mike came back to bed, laid his head down on the pillow, and went right back to sleep. And I continued reading after I took off all my jewelry. Or no, I put all my jewelry back on because I had taken it off, and I put it back on knowing that if my kids came up to the campsite and found the rings, they would know it was me. That would be a way of identifying me, because I figured the bear would eat us and there would be bones and jewelry left.
Yeah.
So then Mike fell back to sleep. I started reading. My rings are all in place, and I hear another noise, and I wake Mike up again, and he goes back out, and this time it's a pit bull. And he did the same thing, knife, the whole thing, making noise. The dog ran away. And he came back to bed, and the night, I think we both fell back to sleep, or I pretended to be asleep most of the night.
Then the bear and the dog both came back at the same time.
Yeah,
fighting each other.
by that time I was so done. I was so done with this backpacking thing. It's become a really fun story, and for some of you who have been to the weekend intensive, you've heard this over and over and over, so you know this story. But the importance of letting you guys know that is what we did do is figure out some things, backpacking was not one of them, that we did well together. On the other side, Mike did go to an opera with me, which was kind of exciting. It was one of those kinds of things that you ought to go at least once, and that's what we did. We proved that we did it once. We're not going to go back there.
Was bad. Yeah.
So between the opera and backpacking, we have eliminated those two things and found some other things that we enjoy doing. The most important thing I want you guys to realize through this is you need to protect your marriage. You need to start thinking like-minded. You need to start appreciating each other and what each of you can contribute to the marriage. That's my newest hedge, but it's the most enjoyable hedge because we come together inside that hedge.
Well, one of the hedges that I have, and I have to be very intentional about this, is that I have to give myself permission and tell myself that it really is okay to give to my spouse even if I don't feel like it. See, I kind of had this feeling in the back of my mind that if I didn't feel like it, it wasn't sincere. And so if I didn't feel like it, I didn't do it. Well, that didn't get communicated very well because it got communicated as he wasn't important. And so I have to intentionally think about giving to Gary, even if I don't feel like it. If I'm in a hurry and I'm making lunch, and we work at home, so our offices are down the hall from one another. But if I'm making lunch, I have to intentionally think about, did you ask Gary if he wanted a sandwich? Because I'm so busy with my own thing. And when I think about it, Gary is supposed to be the number one person in my life. Shouldn't he be treated like that? So sometimes giving to someone, being kind to someone, is simply because of who they are and not necessarily how you're feeling at that particular moment. It doesn't mean I don't mean it, and it doesn't mean I'm being his servant. It just means that I'm treating him kindly because he's important to me.
One of my hedges is I really try to be an open book. Now, I've been saying this all day. I say it all weekend. I mean, I try to be 100% transparently honest with my reaction, because it was in that dishonesty that got us to where we are. You know, I don't like to live in the shadows. That's just not part of it. So what I really try to do at all things is to be an open book to Mona. Now, does that mean she has access to my wallet and my phone and my cell phone and all my passwords and all of that stuff? Yeah, she does. That's very important to me. She should have absolute 100% access to everything, because I think Mike even hit on a little bit earlier about hey, when cell phone rings, answer it. That's fine. That's how I want to live my life. I want to live it as an open book to her, and I don't want to ever give her a hint that there's any kind of dishonesty going on. So that is one of the very important things to me. Now, early stages is I kind of went through a period of, I thought, I feel like I'm going to be treated like a 2-year-old for the rest of my life? And it was like, no, that's not what it is at all. It's my attitude has to change here, because I care about her. I care about our relationship. And if I want her to truly trust me, I have to be an open book for her. And that means that I have to change some things about me. And, being dishonest was one that I had to change. And so I don't lean on that anymore. It's one of the things that I find that's really, really important. So my hedge, be an open book at all times. And that means everything.